always hit record before we actually start.
Yeah, always.
Greetings, Mage fans. This is Pooka, and I am joined today by Josh Heath. We are here to discuss, in this installment of Tomes of Magic, Séance on St. James Street, a quick start for Victorian Mage. Josh, how are you this morning?
I'm doing good, Pooka. I'm really excited to be doing a Tomes of Magic episode. This is the first Tomes of Magic episode I've done.
Is it?
Yeah, in the entire run of Mage the Podcast. So it was nice to read a Mage book with intention.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting it in right at the end, I guess. So because there's not many after this. Although it's funny that when I spoke with Adam and he was like, "Oh yeah, there's not many Tomes of Magic left," and I was like, "I know," and then I looked and I'm like, "Actually, there's a whole bunch because there's still the Victorian Mage books, there's still the Mind's Eye Theater stuff, there's still maybe Awakening will happen, I'm not sure." So yeah.
Has there been a GURPS Mage episode?
I don't know that there's been an episode yet. I know people have reached out about it, and it's on the shelf waiting to be maybe torn apart, maybe deeply analyzed. I don't know. I haven't read it.
A mix of both, probably, yeah.
For this one, I honestly didn't even realize when Victorian Mage was announced, because I missed the crowdfunding. I didn't realize that there was going to be a Jumpstart adventure. So I don't know if you know whether this was like a planned stretch goal or something, but...
Yeah, so the way Onyx Path generally does their stretch goals is they plan ahead for them. They kind of assume, okay, we think we'll hit X, Y, and Z mark. So they knew that they were hoping to have one. Whether they would definitively have one is certainly always up for questions in the crowdfunding world, but they definitely were prepared for it if it went as well as they hoped it would.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was a pleasant surprise regardless. I had initially thought about doing a sequel for it when they had their second adventure game jam, which I think you did Crooked Smile for.
Yeah.
And but then I elected not to, in part because the templates weren't available, and I'm very picky about those things. Anyway, digression. I do think it was a sensible decision to have a jumpstart for this setting because it does dramatically reinvent so much of Mage. And so I'm going into this with the question, does this actually help new players understand the setting and systems better specific to Victorian Mage? And the back cover says, I'm going to just read this little bit of the blurb. It says it contains a condensed but complete rule set, a primer on magic and the straits that come with such practices, straits with a capital S being the paradox term for this setting, as well as an introductory tale centered around a desperate seance aimed at fulfilling the last wish of a dying mage. So we'll see if those bold claims are met. Any other thoughts before we dive in about the existence of the book qua book?
It is one of those books that I was excited for, but also a little nervous for because previous Mage quick starts have been less than amazing. And so I was looking at this going, well, it can't be the worst book I've ever read because I've already read that book. So I went into it with a lot of low expectations and was, we'll get into that, but I went in with low expectations.
And we're also both sitting here with the print-on-demand physical copies, which I always feel a little bit like, I don't know, maybe it's the big font. They always seem weirdly formatted to me. But anyway, it's nice to have a physical printed copy to work with. So I'm going to start flipping some pages here. And worth noting that the writers on this are Rachel Judd, Travis Legg, and Christer Mickle, so... well done all for putting the book together. So we open with this prologue fiction to set the scene. It's like a 2-page spread. We have a noted hermetic on the verge of death who seeks to atone for the part his work has played in suppressing other magical traditions around the world, and he identifies a number of mages who could help, but he dies before he can enact this plan, so his wife sends mysterious magical messages to invite these mages to London. Each of them has their own little point-of-view paragraph or two that highlights the, let's say, individual prejudices and social issues within which they are positioned. And then it returns to the widow preparing herself for their arrival. So I want to get one thing out of the way. I know that when Terry and I read through Victorian Mage Core, I pointed to the tone of that book as being kind of preachy about its stance and then doubling down on an overall dim view of the game's own protagonists. And to reiterate what I said then, I have no problem with the politics they're putting forward. I just felt like it was a missed opportunity to, keep belaboring it at the expense of going in depth with the other angles in the setting. So this book's prologue's tone immediately made me feel that it was going to be more of the same. And it is a weird feeling. It's almost like retcon Hopepunk, if I can call it that. And I do think that if you flatten everything in the time period to a function of imperialism, or really a specific idea of British imperialism kind of built on selected moments, and then you take the tone of this is what you should care about more than anything else in the game, that's a thing, that's a choice. But to me, it kind of betrays a lack of trust that players can get to that idea on their own, and maybe even more effectively than the book repeating the same basic argument. That approach, I think, also limits storytellers who want to tell more morally complex or historically nuanced stories outside that framing because it's not written for them. So when I saw the title of this supplement, I was like, awesome, Séance. That's iconic of the era. It's this basis in real-world goings-on, but offers lots of opportunities for extending outside it. And through the notion of a séance, you can explore aspects of the period that go beyond, by the way, here's yet another way that imperialism is a problem. Maybe I shouldn't have expected the Quickstart to present an approach that was anything other than that, but certainly the introduction here continues that thread. I'm getting all of those thoughts out of the way with the prologue, but do you have any thoughts on the prologue?
I'm going to go in a different direction because I think all of those thoughts are fair. Is that I read this, and from a Chronicle/adventure design standpoint, I try and do these vignettes for my players before any game starts, like similar to this, right? Like, how does the party get together, right? Having those tools like this is really good game design. So I read this, prologue, and I was like, this is exactly how I would open this story. Almost word for word. I would read it to the players. They can have the information about the background and then how they get into it from a cinematic point of view, right? Like, that is a very effective way to drag your players into it. And the interesting thing here is I see the concern about nuance, but I also see a lot of nuance built into the ready-made characters that are provided with the adventure that players can build some depth onto in a really effective way. So I look at this as a baseline of assumption that is actually really effectively open for players providing that depth, storytellers adding a little bit more, adjusting a little bit more, either more hardcore into the imperialism or less, to kind of get the right balance for their table. And I think this book gives a lot of tools for doing that. I have some struggles that we're going to get into when we actually talk about the Chronicle, but I think from a design perspective to allow for a good leaping off point to run this game, I think this intro actually is a great intro for doing that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. My concern is that it requires the commitment in advance, and I think if you're willing to do that, then yes, I agree that the design of it functions really well to bring people into it. But then we turn to the introduction, wherein we get some brief notes on the Ascension War taking place kind of under the surface of society, with the Order of Reason driving that engine of imperialism set against the backdrop of the fractured resistance of the traditions. There's a few paragraphs about the Victorian Age, which are basically, hey, all these images that you have of the era, put those to one side, because what we're focusing on here is the suffering that stems from imperialism. And they throw in a few historical notes along with broad statements. I did feel a little uncomfortable with these when they say things like property had more importance than lives, and it's just kind of this unqualified statement. It's like, I'm on board with your take here, but I want more concrete information to get into if I'm going to be running a game in that setting.
Yeah.
But I do think this paragraph that I have noted on page 9, an enigmatic invitation, and I think this kind of really sums up the whole approach here. So it says, London, the heart of the British Empire, is home to the widow Mrs. Wright. Though unknown to each of her guests, the lady sent invitations across the world, bringing a diverse collection of mages to her doorstep. Once there, Mrs. Wright beseeches each of them to assist in fulfilling a request, but as the guests unveil the horrors in her home, they must face reflections of their own legacies, and a lifetime of regrets caused by the recently deceased Adeptus Wright's participation in colonization and imperial conquest. Surviving the night should bring them one step on the path of understanding their role in the world of magic, and the endless possibilities that lie before them if they unite. And that really encapsulates both the adventure and the ethos of Victorian Mage as a whole, and the Jumpstart specifically. There's also a little sidebar giving an overview of the traditions involved in this game. The characters are drawn from the Alibatin, Akashiana, Chakravanti, Dreamspeakers / Kavadi, Sahajiya, and Verbenai. The one that stands out to me here, actually, in this little sidebar is the Alibatin description, because it's at variance with the other group's format. The others have kind of like descriptions of their magical style, their origins, or their activities, but then the Battini have this philosophical statement next to a comment on imperialism. And while their anti-imperialism as a group is important, I feel like their faith is too, and so are their methods. And this is going to be like an issue which kept cropping up for me in the book, where there was only so much space and so many words to fill. And the choice to reiterate the theme at the expense of giving detail about the groups to new players is something that occasionally frustrated me. So, putting that out there. Beautiful art, though, also.
Fantastic art. I love the art in this intro section. It's really high quality. The Gaydos art on, I think it's page 6 in particular, is just really good. His use of digital and physical art to produce some of these pieces is a newer style for him, but one that I'm really, really impressed by when he uses it.
These horses are enormous in this art.
The slightly demonic horses is what they appear to be, with those little magical purple eyes.
Yeah.
I guess I don't have much to add in this introduction. I reflected on some of the same issues that you noted. I thought we have almost a half page more that we could have used on page 9 to get more information about the traditions, which would have been a very valuable use of that space. From a layout perspective, one of the things that, this is a designer thing that I hopefully is useful for people to hear. When you find you have a half page like that, use it, right? Use it either for art or use it for more content. This is a good time in the development process and the layout process where you're like, oh, I could put something else here. It's okay to do that, right, before you put the book out. So if you look at everything and you're like, I could add, 250 words here, particularly on a quick start that is designed to try to give people as much as you can, use that space, right? It's very helpful. So those are my thoughts there.
Yeah, definitely.
You want to get into I guess maybe this is actually the first chapter?
I guess so, yeah. It's not actually labeled chapter 1, is it? So bringing the story to life. This is kind of the nuts and bolts about the system. I'm curious from your perspective, what do you think are the points that every introductory book like this ought to hit? And for Mage in particular, what are the key things that you would expect to see?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so it's going to give you the basic dice mechanic rules, right? How do you roll? What do you roll? What things do you need to get? So how do difficulty and successes work? How do the key parts of the magical system work, right? What is arete? What is willpower? How does quintessence work? Those things are essential, I think, to making the game go. And I think overall, this does a decent job of that sort of thing. But I guess my question to you is, what are the things you look for in this sort of mechanical part of the quick start, and do you think that it produces those?
Yeah, well, so agreed that obviously you need the mechanics of the dice and the dots on the sheet. I think how actions and timing work, in particular with something like combat. Anything special, assuming that you're going to be running this as a one-shot, anything special that needs to be contained or can be contained to a single session. So the magic system, yes, but you probably don't really need like backgrounds.
Yeah.
I know that when I've run one-shots before, I try to like change backgrounds into like, here's a little bonus that you can drop a number of times equal to the dots that you have, and just that's it. I think setting-wise, you also need to know enough about the world and your character's role in it to make choices for your actions that fit with how you envision them. Because as much as this is a test of the rules for new players, you also want them to get a sense of what it means to be in a more involved Chronicle. And personally, I also look for elements that will allow a story to have some versatility and where mechanics can be massaged in the service of the story, because that's one of the things that makes Mage itself to me. So yeah, that's my take. And the basics we get here, we get notes about how traits are rated 1 through 5, with the exception of Arete willpower. There's an explanation of building dice pools, difficulties and success, types of actions, overview of combat. There's a note on counter magic, which is useful. 2 full pages of weapons charts.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about the weapons charts.
Yeah, go for it.
It's interesting because World of Darkness really doesn't ever need extensive charts for weapons. Often, really, what you need to know is when I use this thing, how difficult is it to use, and how much damage will it do when I, hit with it. And it's always interesting to me when I open a World of Darkness book and there's tables of weapons. I'm like, you can just say simple weapon, harmful weapon, extremely harmful weapon, right? And you can literally skin those any way you want to, right? These are not well-defined, nuanced combat mechanics. And so flipping to this, particularly in a quick start, I went, oh, someone got way, way overboard with this particular element of this part of the story, because I don't need a blunderbuss in this story at all. I don't need a elephant gun. I was just surprised to see these things.
Do you feel that that's maybe like one of the main pieces of Dungeons and Dragons DNA that has lingered in the system?
Absolutely. That is probably the only thing that is definitively D&D-esque that has continued to exist in World of Darkness.
Yeah. And then the back half of the chapter covers magic, which I have to admit, like, the piece of art with the guy on the train is maybe one of my favorite pieces in Victorian Mage. It's very evocative. Anyway, so we have the elegant, uncanny, catastrophic axis that we know in modern Mage as coincidental, vulgar with witnesses. There's the basic steps of creating an effect, quick descriptions of the spheres and their capabilities, a couple basic notes about effects, including damage and duration, and specific attention to correspondence, spirit, and time. We also get an aura colors chart and several other charts that each list a handful of common magical effects with their sphere levels. Definitely useful for this kind of scenario, I would say.
Yeah. This, to me, is the best part of this. Like, the little common effects charts, I was like, I wish every single Mage book had this. A new list in every single book would make Mage books super valuable on their own, just to have that, right?
Yeah.
Because the biggest struggle I've had with new players who don't grok the central thesis of Mage, right? To have things like this helps them go, oh, now I see how this thing works, right? What this sphere means, how I can use that to create a specific effect. So to me, this book is worth it just for this segment alone. But again, there's a half page where we could have gotten more of that even, right? But they definitely were like, we expect these ones to be the most common. So here you go. Here are some that you should be aware of and need.
Yeah. The main thing missing for me, which could have filled that half page, was really just more about the nature of mages and why their magic is so special. There's like half a sentence in one place, half a sentence in another, a few sentences in the opening paragraph that vaguely suggests that different paradigms are a thing. But if you're intending to get people involved in the game, that feels like something they should really know from the start, even if they don't really need it for this adventure. Speaking of backgrounds, they don't mention them at all. And maybe they're not relevant to a one-shot, but people are going to ask the question, well, how do I represent my allies? How do I represent my money? Things like that. Otherwise, I guess they do hit all the top-level stuff mechanically, so...
Yeah. I think the paradigm bit is really interesting for when we get to the character sheets themselves, because instead of having a section for paradigm on the character sheet, they put the paradigm information in the focuses section of the character sheet, which is fascinating for its lack of accuracy mechanically, but it's helpful. Like, I found those really useful for looking at the characters and understanding how I would roleplay them. But it just made me go, well, it's interesting that there isn't a place for this on the character sheet, but you need that in a one-shot, so putting it there is a choice, right? It's an interesting, like, decision of, we know this will be key information. How do we give it to you, and where will it go?
Yeah. You're making me realize also that something else, which I don't think is in here, but maybe it should be like a standard thing for all jumpstarts like this, is just a page or two at the end that's like, okay, you want to keep playing? Here's the key things that you're going to need to know.
Yeah.
That would have been nice.
Totally. And the other thing that you mentioned that I wanted to touch on is there's a hedge wizard, the wife of said passed away old Order of Hermes character. You are told she is a hedge mage, right, or a hedge wizard, or whatever word they use. They may even say hedge witch, but she is not a mage. But you don't know that from the rules here, right? If you were given this quick start as a player, you wouldn't, and you've never played Mage, you never listened to Mage the podcast, you should. We'd be like, I don't understand what that means, right? Why does that matter? She clearly has the ability to send these messages, but she can do divination is her only thing, but she can also send these random letters across the world. I'm like, there are layers of confusion in my mind right now.
Maybe her husband left a stack of enchanted vellum or something.
Maybe, yeah.
No, they had paper at this point. I take it back. Paper.
Sure.
So then on page 29, we get to the opening of the story in question. And I think I'm just going to read this page, if that's...
Yeah.
Again, it sums up everything fairly well. Nearly 100 years ago, the newly awakened Ezekiel Wright joined the Order of Hermes. The sole scion of a mid-ranked family of English aristocrats, Ezekiel was part of the global 1% in terms of wealth, power, and status. Over the years, he used his social and political connections to support the Order's aims, ensuring his rapid rise in the Hermetic hierarchy. As Adeptus Wright deepened his study of magic, he became convinced that something akin to a grand unified theory of magic existed, an paradigm binding all mages in commonality. Should he uncover this universal paradigm, he theorized, he could bring the Ascension War to an end, not through victory, but through unity. The Adeptus spent the next several decades traveling, learning about the diversity of paradigms throughout the globe. He collected potent artifacts and gathered learned masters to his London mansion. One of these masters brought his daughter, whom the Adeptus sheltered, educated, and eventually married. His wife became his consort and research assistant, as he struggled page by page to reconcile all of the disparate paradigms of which he learned. He edited much of these paradigms, viewing it as stripping away extraneous belief in an attempt to discover the true core of magical practice. He was trying to write a mage rulebook. Throughout his endeavors, many mages, including those he brought to his home, warned him this project was doomed to fail. The Adeptus dismissed them as short-sighted and small-minded, refusing to heed their advice. Only a compliment from an enemy made him question his work. Lord William de Vere invited Adeptus Wright to join his newly forming Magus organization, an evolution of the Order of Reason which called itself the Technocratic Union. De Vere waxed rhapsodic over the efficiency and dedication with which Adeptus Wright suppressed and excised baseless superstition from the world, and how his talents would be put to good use in the Union. Nothing could have shocked Adeptus Wright more. As he looked over his theorem papers and dissertations, he realized, however, that the technocrats were correct. Rather than bringing unity to mages, he had only divided them further. He had utterly failed. The Adeptus began the painful process of unmaking his life's work. Mostly he succeeded, but perhaps due to his broken heart, his health rapidly deteriorated. Now his widow is left to finish his work. She reaches out to several mages, hoping they have the knowledge and skills to finally put the past to rest. So I think this points to a couple different things. First, I think you need a veteran mage storyteller to run the game, otherwise the magical side of this won't make sense. New players will understand the idea of a mage complicit in colonial ideologies. They won't understand why paradigm and disparate paradigms matter, and they also have a capital D, disparate, thrown in reference to the Disparate Alliance. There's this sidebar on the next page that emphasizes how his arrogance and unwillingness to listen to that complicity, followed by the advice to seek out information about your character's background if it's different from your own, which is necessary advice, but the pairing feels a little bit like, you don't want to end up like this character, do you? And I don't know, it's just, again, there's a tone to it, which I find, I imagine there are players for whom this will be a turnoff.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the thing I struggle with.
Yeah. It's interesting to me because it's Ebenezer Scrooge being visited by the ghosts, right? Having that revelation that Christmas is actually amazing. That's what's happened to this guy, just in a different direction, right? And that's fine. Like, but I actually, if you're going to go there, make it explicit that that's the reference you're making. And I think that would have been better.
Yeah.
I like the idea that this character has worked so long on a thing that ultimately is harmful, and he recognizes that. But I wouldn't. It's interesting that because I disagree with the wording they use to say he was successful at all. Because as you read through the Chronicle, he wasn't successful in preventing the damage from his actions at all. He actually quite failed at doing so. And I think it would have been better to emphasize that he was trying and failing because it's more honest, it's more human for him to have recognized I have done wrong, I'm trying to fix it, but he's failing because he just doesn't have a good frame of reference for that failure. That adds more nuance to the character, particularly later on when and if you interact with his spirit, right? That he should be this complex individual. And they tell you in various places to make these things more complex, but give you one or two dimensions to these characters who should be three-dimensional.
Yeah. And the idea of what constitutes evil is something that comes up a lot in Victorian in particular. Like, the sidebar on this page starts with, is it accurate to call Adeptus Right evil? And then kind of hashing that out, I mean, it's like 4 sentences, which is not enough to hash out whether someone's lifetime of actions within this kind of context can be defined that way. So trying not to spoil the story too much, it basically goes like this. Your character gets a mysterious missive from the widow Mrs. Wright, inviting them to London via a magical trinket adapted to their focus, whatever that will mean for a novice player. Each character is transported on All Hallows' Eve for the séance because some restless spirits must be exorcised before the dismantling of her husband's work can be completed. And I think in this context is that there are particular items that are fetters. It keeps mentioning artifacts, but not like magical item artifacts. It's things that ghosts seem to be tied to. So Mrs. Wright needs the mages because she's, as you said, not fully awakened herself, but she is able to lead the séance, and each character has their own ghost who comes and speaks with them. They each get a little bespoke quest with suggested paths and resolutions, and a reward for the character to take forward. But I'm eliding details here in case anyone listening does want to actually run this. So what are your thoughts on, as someone who has probably written and run a lot more one-shots than I have, what are your thoughts on how this adventure is put together?
Many thoughts. The first is, this is not a one-shot. This is, at minimum, a 5 to 6 story chronicle, right?
Would you say if it's like you had fewer players, you could get away with, like, is it one story per player, or is it?
Yeah, it's at least one session per player, okay. Particularly because there's one of these, the very first quest, as it were, that you're given, requires you go to multiple places around the world. And I looked at that and I went, while I like this conceptually, I think this fits the theme you're trying to say that this story provides. It is weird to be given something, hey, run this in one session, but you have to go to multiple places around the world to make it work. I'm like, that's not gonna happen, right? You have to get it done in one location for it to work for a one-shot, or a few kind of connected but close sections. So those are my initial thoughts. I have more, but I want to kick it back to you. And what are some of your thoughts?
Well, to follow that, it's also because it's so wildly uneven, because, one character's story involves international travel and the other is like a philosophy pop quiz.
Yeah, right.
So, I mean, the players can help each other, but it still feels quite imbalanced in that way. So each character's own scenario also takes pains to connect the ghost they encounter with a specific community impressed by capital E Empire. and it outlines Adeptus Right's involvement in their oppression and pushes the character towards helping resolve that oppression. I'll also note that there is no chorister and no hermetic character because they're early on mentioned as like riding the imperialism wave along with the Order of Reason. In some cases, this involves helping restore the paradigms of those communities that have been erased or that Wright helped to erase. And then in others, it seems to be more standard unfinished business ghost stuff. So that was like another kind of unevenness that I noted, which, I mean, going into this as a player, if you have a certain level of expectations for the setting that the adventure is presenting, you're going to want a character that aligns with that and a story that aligns with that, and they don't necessarily all line up. I don't really know if there's any design way to resolve that, but it stood out to me.
Yeah. I think my biggest, from a mechanical Chronicle structure standpoint, issue here is this is supposed to be a single seance.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, there's no way to run all of these scenes within a single seance that makes sense, right? Because it's, how are you going to transfer from one to the other scene in a way that the players all feel like they are all involved in each of the sessions, right? Each of the segments. And additionally, there's no description of the seance itself.
That's true, isn't it? I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, they briefly say she uses all of the theatrics you would assume from a seance. And I'm like, well, that's awesome if I know what a seance looks like, right? I've certainly seen some in cinema, but I would love a description of her version of a seance, particularly because she has kind of a unclear background. Now, I may be wrong. She's from a Native American.
She is, yeah. From the Southwest.
Right. So she was born to a Native American community in the Southwest in the U.S., but it's unclear how long she actually spent with the Mojave. So I look at that and I go, one, why is she holding a seance? Is she so kind of in the paradigm of her ex-husband that makes the most sense for her? And that's fine, but tell me that, right? Mm-hmm. Or would there be elements of some of that cultural background that come into the seance too? And that would be fascinating, right? Like I would love to have some form of understanding of what her relationship with her culture and this particular style of ritual is. But we don't get any of that.
Yeah. That half page would have been helpful.
Yep.
And so the last bit, I'm going to spoil this slightly, so if you do want to run this adventure, skip the next minute or so. The last bit involves hunting down the ghost of Adeptus Right himself, or Adeptus Right, sorry, and judging whether to fully destroy him. And that hook, that piece of the plot, it kind of feels like the way the book presents the characters, and maybe the way Victorian Mage as a whole treats its protagonists, is like, you're either this avenging character who's okay with cruelty and immorality, frankly, in the service of resisting empire. Again, a specific inflection of empire, although this Quickstart makes an effort to link kind of the various atrocities, injustices, and ignorances across this period of history together. So you're either that, or you're part of the problem and need to be removed. And if that's the setting, if that's the approach, then what I want as a gamer is some measure of moral complexity to keep it interesting. Because otherwise you're telling the same story over and over in different costumes. And Mage in particular can be so much more than that. So to your point about the seance not really being described, I think that speaks to what my main complaint is about spending so much time hammering this theme when you could also be spending time enriching the descriptions and because that I think is how you get players into it, by providing those details.
Yeah.
But
that whole bit of the story with going into the Shadowlands, right?
Yeah.
I guess spoilers there. But like that moment to me feels incredibly anticlimactic.
Yeah.
Because there's not enough information about what you're actually going to do there. Like the intent is you are challenging him with all of these things that he's done and these people he's hurt, And again, this very Uncle Scrooge, not Uncle Scrooge, but Scrooge. There I go with some Donald Duck references. But this very Charles Dickens Scrooge vibe is that this guy is going to be challenged by these ghosts of these people, in his life. But make that the story again, instead of it being the story about these ghosts and their attachment to these fetters, right, to these artifacts. Because it's about that. It's not about Wright's theft of these artifacts. That's just background to get them in front of the characters. So I feel like there's so much nuance that could be designed there to make that more interesting. But challenging him just does not seem to be the logical outcome of any of the things leading up to that moment.
Yeah. Which makes it even harder to run it over an extended period or to feed it into an extended chronicle, because without having that, without having the particulars, I mean, mechanical stuff aside that you would need, those particulars are directly relevant to embodying the character, to role-playing. And the individual tasks that each character gets set, there is, in addition to the social justice element, there's a metaphysical importance to it within the context of the setting. I mean, if you're a veteran storyteller, maybe you can do some extra prep and, I don't know, go off your own inner moxie or whatever to make it work. But the book doesn't help you with that.
Yeah.
So that was frustrating. Would you run it? Would you run this?
I would absolutely run this.
Okay.
And I think I would run this because reading it, I had ideas to fill in those blanks, right? I would extend it to a 6-shot, right? It would be a short mini-series of a game. It would reduce the travel element. I would not have that. I would have instead the players go to places around London to engage with communities who have a similar resonance to the intent of that whole segment for a character, which would have been just as appropriate, right? You're not told about London at all in this book.
Yeah. There's
no descriptions of London. There's no information about the house.
I don't think the core book will help you with that.
That's fair. And that's fine, because you can look up that information about London. You can look up information about Victorian houses. But having some of that might have been helpful. A tiny amount of it would have been helpful. But I would run this because I like the characters. I like the way the Chronicle concepts are structured. Mm-hmm. I would just add a little bit, right? The philosophical discussion one for a player, right? I would create some need for the players to hash out a thing together, right? Where maybe there is a challenge presented to them, a puzzle per se, that includes the philosophical question as a question for them to answer, would be a way of making that really interesting. Mm-hmm. But as written, of course not. That's impossible to run this as written. But you could certainly turn this into a really good story. Yeah.
I would trust you to run it. I don't think I would trust myself to run it. Especially with 6 players, because, I mean, even if you do find ways to help your teammates out, presumably you're going to take something of a backseat when each other person is dealing with their own ghost and their story. And it's if you're the first one who deals with your beef with imperialism and then you have to sit through 5 others, it's going to get, it's going to drag.
Yeah.
There's also little things that kind of bug me in the writing. There's a little bit of the projecting of modern gender constructs back into history, which when I would teach queer culture and media, I would say to my students, be careful with this. There's inconsistencies in spelling, which bug me. The scenario outside the personal quests, like you said, is so skeletal. I think the amount of work that I feel like I would have to put in, I'd rather just design my own.
Yeah.
And then I feel like I could modulate it better to the needs of the players that I have.
Yeah. It's in a related, unrelated vein, right? This is supposedly about a seance. There is a spirit board in the Weird Wonders book that I wrote.
Yeah.
So I'm,
tie-ins.
But using that in this story would add depth, right? Would add a little bit of linkages to some stuff there. So there's things like that you could do, I think, to flesh it out. But do we want to talk about the characters at all?
Let's. I have like a one-liner for each of them, so
Okay.
I can just briefly fly through them, and then you can point out anything that I miss. The 6 characters. We have Nur, a gender-fluid Alibatin mystic and pacifist from a small persecuted religious community in Anatolia, who's more of a philosopher-poet than a fighter. There's Jinyi, a Lady Akashic anti-drug pirate paladin, their words, who's frustrated by her elders' inaction in dealing with Britain, so she goes around executing their ship captains. And it was her name that had 2 different spellings, and I was like, come on. There's Sakaram, an Indian-born and British-raised gentleman assassin of the Chakravanti, who's all about repatriating stolen artifacts from his country and being queer. Birgit, a Sámi shaman and granddaughter of a dream speaker, committed to rediscovering her family's traditions and fighting against the order of reason. Mendoza, a Sahajiya from Southern California, who does extreme experience stuff to push his limits while dealing with racism and looking for a place to call home. And Lady Hildegard Clifton, an older verbena matron and rural aristocrat who's recommitted to turning her coven towards defeating imperialism. They also keep capitalizing imperialism like it's a game term, and I'm not sure why. So do any of these resonate particularly with you?
It's interesting. So I read them all, and there were things I liked about every one of them and things I really disliked about most of them. Birgit, in particular, is the one I want to call out for being a really good character, really great concept. The connection as a dream speaker left me a little frustrated. Because, and this is my general concern with the dream speakers as a thing anyway, but the idea that this Sama woman would be a dream speaker first over probably being a verbena or being a orphan or something like that, like being a dream speaker doesn't seem to make sense because I don't understand how the dream speakers are organized in this time period. In an alliance with one another. In the modern age, I can see that. It actually makes sense to me. In Sorcerer's Crusade, it makes sense to me because the leaders of the Dream Speakers are actively going out and recruiting these people. But this particular woman being a Dream Speaker doesn't quite track for me.
Okay.
And so I have some frustrations with that. And I have some frustrations with her paradigm matching either a Dream Speaker or a Sama Noadi, right? So I'm like...
I was just checking her actual paradigm.
Yeah. Do you want to read it?
So it says, you've witnessed the peaks of divine order and earthly chaos. You reach to the spirit world through the shamanism, herbalism, and dreamcrafting of your forebears, and plainly see the poison that the Order of Reason's earthly obsessions are wreaking on the divine world.
So all of that, and then the use of the word shaman in there for a group who don't use the term shaman to describe themselves, right? Like that is an imposed Victorian word onto people. And so, well, yes, it probably could be used in character here because someone would be trying to explain their practices to other people. But the fact that the book rails about imperialism and then it uses an imperialized term uncritically frustrates me with that particular individual. I know I spent quite a bit on that character, right? But I see little seeds of these problems with all of them where they're not caricatures, right? They're not pure pastiches of these various groups. There's nuance within them, but there's also inadvertently a bit of stereotyping that is occurring by attempting to wade away from it. And that is the biggest struggle with writing diverse characters is you try to make them not a stereotype, and indirectly you often reinforce some stereotypical elements in doing that.
I just had a really oblique thought about all of this because earlier you had talked about the characters being, I think you said 1 or 2 dimensional rather than 3 dimensional.
Yeah.
And it made me think of haiku, which is a weird connection. But I remember a poetry teacher that I had once explaining haiku. Like, you can talk about haiku in terms of syllable structure and season words and all of those mechanical things. But conceptually, I remember her saying, the structure of a haiku is 2 things in relation to each other, and the poetry comes from the space in between. And I think there's something similar going on here, where you have a 1-dimensional character is the stereotype. You make it 2-dimensional by dropping in some left field piece that is like, oh, I didn't expect that. But unless you demonstrate how those two things juxtaposed against each other are interesting, the character doesn't rise to the level of 3 dimensions. And maybe that's kind of the problem here.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
For myself, I obviously liked Noor the most for the gender fluidity, but I am tickled that we have another non-Euthanatos gunslinger in here. And I wonder if, like, the art of the Euthanatos gunslinger was actually originally supposed to be Sahajiya, and they, like, shuffled it around or something, but...
Maybe. Mendoza is my favorite of these characters.
Yeah, I do like him. Even though I find his characterization a little bit hard to... Like, with his style of magic, I'm not quite getting there. But I do like him as a character, yeah.
Yeah, the interesting thing for me about Mendoza, I ran a Victorian game before Victorian actually came out, way before Victorian came out. And one of my players played a gunslinger.
Nice.
As his character concept, right? So I looked at Mendoza and I'm like, oh, this is a very similar sort of character, right? In that they've become a gunslinger because they don't kind of feel comfortable in any of these communities and spaces. And the magic angle is really intriguing for me because as a Sahajiya, like the idea of kind of throwing oneself fitfully, like forcefully into the world as a gunslinger, I'm like, that is a great cinematic character concept. I think it would be terrible in a group at the table, right? I think it would be disruptive and annoying and weird, but like as a character, he's the most interesting of them to me for that.
Sometimes it seems like characters are better for their own solo games, and then when you try to mash them together into a group, it's...
Yeah.
And speaking of the character sheet too, I wanted to mention, in addition to folding the paradigm into the focus section with some instruments, I was frustrated that there wasn't really information about how to lead from that to the tables of effects that we got.
Yeah.
So you can say, like, oh, Mendoza does these extreme experience things to push his limits, and, like, that's the basis of his magic. But then you turn back to page whatever it was with the tables, and you're like, let me actually check what his spheres are and see what he has here.
I do want to talk about the spheres of each of these characters at some point.
Sorry, so he has, like, Matter 2, Mind 3, Spirit 1. So, like, how is he going to use his extreme experience to turn lead into gold, for example? So that's, like... You know, the ST has to do a lot of heavy lifting here. I also noted my beef with the character sheets in particular is that all of them have language merits to represent the languages they speak, and their native tongue is always included as one. And I'm like, you should not be spending a point to have your own native language as a merit. It's one way to waste freebies, but anyway.
Yeah, so in that vein, all of these characters have 3 arete.
Yeah.
Almost all of them have at least 3 dots in one sphere. These are not starting characters to me, the way they're designed. Like, I looked at them and went, oh, these characters are slightly better than your average starting character the way they are designed. And I don't hate that. I think that's actually good for a actual one-shot, to have your characters have 30, 40, 50 XP on their sheet. Mm-hmm. But with Mage, I always try to start my players at 2 or 1 dots rather than 3. Because 3 is where things sometimes get off the rails, and players struggle with that 3rd dot until they've really got a solid idea of what that sphere does in the 1 and 2 dot spaces. So I probably would tweak that, but those are my thoughts about the sheets themselves. As I went, why doesn't at least one of the characters have 2 dots in arete? And I'm like, it's because people writing this are like, they need more dots to do the magic.
The magic that has been preordained by the plot. Right. I know that I have done a 3-dot sphere for starting characters for one-shots, but I always try to make sure no one has time 3 or spirit 3. Because those are the 2 that I'm like, I don't need anyone messing with actions or crossing into the Umbra. And I think Birgit has the Spirit 3, but she needs it for her story. The last thing I want to say about the characters is Lady Hildegard. There's a lot more in Germany than the Black Forest. Yeah.
And this is just a continuation of the obsession that White Wolf people have with the Black Forest, which is the most boring part of Germany. There's lots of interesting places in Germany, as well as the fact that Germany as it exists in about 1898 is a very interesting grouping of disparate communities, disparate countries, effectively. So this character should be from somewhere more interesting in what is now Germany, right? There's so much you could glean from. She's a Bavarian noble person, right? That would be fascinating. But being from the Black Forest area, I'm like, okay, you've given me nothing of use with this character.
I have a thread of my family tree that goes back there. This is completely unrelated. And my brother and I occasionally get into genealogy. And Germany, being Germany, has digitized all of its church record books and everything. So we were able to trace this one thread back to the 1500s. And it was all, the same three families all marrying each other in this little village in the Black Forest. And I went and found there's a resident of that village that made he sort of became the historian and kind of gave these descriptions of the village history, including stories about each of the original 24 houses that were at the core of the village. And one of those, it's the house that was handed down through my great whatever line for generations. So I kind of want to go visit and be like, hi, my great grandparents used to live here. I just wanted to stop in, see what you've done with the place, But
that would be super cool.
Yeah, it's probably the coolest thing in the Black Forest.
Yeah, fair.
So anyway, unless there's anything more about the characters, that's it. That's the end of the book. It just cuts off. Again, it would have been nice to have some kind of, okay, you're running this introductory adventure. Here's how you can carry it forward. As a quick start for the rules, I think it suffices for the first session, but you're going to need more rule basis to go beyond that, particularly when you start seeing things like, oh, Jinyi has a cult too, I think, or maybe it's one that Noor has it, maybe. So you need to know what that means. And, or no, Jinyi has the familiar, that's it.
Right.
So it's familiars are not explained at all, but that's a directly relevant thing to the game. I would also say that it certainly foregrounds the themes of Victorian Mage, probably just as much as the core book. So at least new players will know what they're getting into with this setting. Their mileage and yours as the storytellers may vary for how much you want to lean into that. I have more comments, but I'll hand it over to you.
My overall comment at the end of this book is that I think there is useful material here for you to run your own Chronicle. And enough that I might hand a player all of this and say, you can read all of this. I'm not going to run this story as written, but you can read this if you're trying to get an idea of what Mage is like-ish. You glean some useful things from that mechanically and from a story perspective. But this is a 5 top hats out of 10 sort of thing for me, where I can see lots of flaws in it, but it actually is a much better quick start for Mage than any other quick start has tried to be.
Fair, yeah. I think it fulfills the promises laid out on the back cover. I will admit that. It is an overview of the setting as promised. It just feels too one note for me. I would have wanted, to your point about the Séance, more context about spiritualism in Victorian society. I would have wanted more about the questionable morality of some of these characters and how players engage with that. I would have wanted to see the dynamics of how characters might influence the way the other characters might approach their goals. Because it says, oh, if so-and-so needs this particular assist in their story, this player's character can contribute, which is a good note. It facilitates people working together, but it doesn't get into the role-playing aspect of it, embodying these characters. And for me, Mage is about, and this story is about, discovering how to work together as much as it is about righting injustices. So just pointing the party at imperialism and saying, okay, go, that's not going to support any logic beyond the rather flimsy, oh, they have to work together because they're players in this game. Maybe good for a first session, but beyond that, it needs more. It's really it's 6 short stories of varying length and complexity held together by this sketched out frame narrative and 6 ready-made characters that you can do with that what you will. So yes, it minimally does what it sets out to do. I think my own disappointment comes from wanting it to do more to enrich and complicate the setting it introduces.
Yeah.
That may still make it better than all the other Mage ones, Jumpstarts, but yeah, that was my beef.
I think it's fair. I think in that vein, it's a struggle to me to see how these characters work paradigmatically together short term even. Like, there are vastly different attitudes about how the world works. And yes, that's a mage issue, right? That's a mage issue you have to deal with. But I would have loved a little short 3 or 4 bullets for each of them. Like, this is how they can interact with each other's paradigms. This is how they agree, disagree with each other. Like, something like that would have been really helpful.
Yeah. Some of them aren't going to like each other at all.
Right.
And that's important and relevant. And I wonder if there's maybe kind of a meta commentary about the traditions writ large that this book was trying to suggest. I mean, Victorian Mage maybe spells it out more explicitly. But again, you have to, I think with any Jumpstart, you have to assume somebody running it or playing, well, particularly playing it, has not read that core book and has no idea. So again, that's a big lift for the storyteller. Maybe just like a storyteller-focused set of pages to kind of talk about how to do those things. Maybe that would have resolved a lot of my difficulties with it.
Fair.
If there had been Victorian Mage templates, I would have done a second installment, and then I could have addressed it myself. But anything else we want to say before we get to the pair of listener questions?
No, let's tackle those pair of listener questions.
They're easy ones. So Bryce asks, I'm guessing this book doesn't cover the whole colonialism inherent in the setting very well or at all, right? Does it work for proto-technocracy characters, disparates, or is it wholly trad-focused? I won't go so far as to say it doesn't cover it very well, or, I mean, it certainly covers it. Whether or not it is deep enough or complex enough, personally, I would say not for me. But yeah, it does not work for proto-technocracy or disparate characters.
Yeah, not at all. You have to play the characters in this book because they won't make any sense. The story, you can't run this story with other characters.
Yeah. And then Heilong asks, there was a focus on societies, capital S, in Victorian Mage. Does this Jumpstart delve or give a feel for that, especially in conjunction to sleepers and sorcerers? It does not.
Nope.
The end. And that was, societies were one of the highlights of Victorian Mage to me, seeing these kinds of connections that could be, it opened up the possibility for how the factions in Mage might have evolved. And that was really valuable to kind of see those different permutations. So yeah, I mean, that's much too complex to include in a Jumpstart, but would have been nice to make an allusion maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
The sleepers and sorcerers piece, certainly.
Yeah. I have no additional thoughts there.
Well, I guess that's the book. It is available on the Storyteller's Vault and Drive-Thru RPG for purchase. And, well, Josh, thanks for taking the opportunity to tome this magic.
Yeah.
And
I am excited to have tomed this book with you.
Huzzah!
Huzzah. Until next time, Mage fans, have a wonderful day.
And truth until the straits, good sirs and madams. I don't know. I don't know what the Victorian equivalent of truth until paradox would be. Keep it real. This has been Mage the Podcast, where in spite of overall Victorian drabness, we believe that summoning the restless dead is no excuse not to serve one's fiercest looks, dressed to impress and turn that séance into a slayance. We're supported in our explorations of dandy-esque spiritualism by our executive producers, whose esteemed ranks you can join at www.patreon.com/magethepodcast. Foremost among these are the following oracles of various fashions from the era. Bad Company, Oracle of the Tea Gown. Ben Bandelow, Oracle of the Ascot Tie. Buck Gregory, Oracle of the Lego Mutton Sleeve. Christopher Phillips, Oracle of the Fabergé Cufflink. Derek Semsick, Oracle of Perkins Mauve. Drawn Cap, Oracle of the Dinner Jacket. Guy Stewart, Oracle of Vulcanized Rubber Mourning Jewelry. Joshua Hillerup, Oracle of the Aesthetic Lecturing Costume. Sean Gallagher, Oracle of the Shell Cameo. Spartacus, Oracle of the Bowler Hat. And the crew of Erebus, Oracle of the Horsehair Crinoline. We'd also like to thank Archmaster Andrew Edelstein, Archmaster Berto, Archmaster Dan Svensson, Archmaster Jeff Bryn, Archmaster Leroy Bryce, Archmaster Morgan Oran, Archmaster Simon Strand, Archmaster Wolf Larryson, Alex, Alexander, Alexia, Amberversion, Anders S., Blaze Haber, Bryce Perry, Bill, Chartan, Sig, Cromwell the Archaeologist, Daniel Cuppin, Daniel Scribner, Darren Hennessy, David Roy, Dorcadus, Drunk Des, Ian Robertson, EVG, Eli Levenger, Eric Schwank, Fozzie Barra, Fuse82, George Lara, Gray Chillick H., Henry Kraft, Ia Bull, Jade Barath, James B., Jason Duncan, Jason Kennedy, Jenna F., Jeremy Z., Jervis Johnson, Joshua Rotella, Kathleen Halprin, Kelrick, Kevin Fitzpatrick, Chris Kinner, Leslie Weatherstone, Laws and Stuff, Lauren Jensen, Makeshift, Manel Canos, Matthew Proyle, Maurice Hopkins, Melissa Krause, Michael Parker, Navarro, Nikita Klamanoff, Otter Wraith, Patrick McNamara, Rachel Grace, Race Buford, Ricardo, Robert the Robot, Rob H., Ryan Candy, Ryan Stray, Samuel Tobin, Seven S's, Starfish, Stephen Carton, That's Real Nito, Tyler Bryan, and Will Vincent.
Our EP shoutout this week is to Lauren Jensen, or possibly Jensen, who shares a surname with, among other things, the annual Jensen, or possibly Jensen, Prize for the best corporate finance and organizations research papers published in the Journal of Financial Economics, one of the premier academic journals on the subject. Winning papers include On the Optimality of Resetting Executive Stock Options, and The Marketing of Seasoned Equity Offerings, and How Do Venture Capitalists Make Decisions? Naturally, any number of these could be syndicate procedures to move some primal energy around in cryptic ways. But frankly, that convention could be having more fun, perhaps working with the Void Engineers to establish ownership structure for asteroids, such as, in another surname tie-in, the one known as 5900 Jensen. Discovered at the Lowell Observatory in 1930, it was overshadowed by decades by that outfit's rather more notable discovery of Pluto earlier in that year. I dare say it's time main-belt minor planets like this one got some more respect and attention, and so the next time I'm considering how to privatize mining rights out beyond Mars, Lauren, I'll think of you. If you super liked this episode or super didn't, drop us a line at magethepodcast@gmail.com or talk to us at magethepodcast.bisky.social on Bluesky. We have a Hop and Discord community at discord.me/magethepodcast. If you like us, please give us a review on the platform of your choosing or tell a friend about us. Also go to magethepodcast.com for show notes and all of our previous shows, for the road is long and ascension awaits.